Hi, my name is Laura Jones. I'm the Operations and Programming Coordinator for Comic-Con International, and I'm here today as part of the Thought Bubble Digital Comic-Con talking with Jackie Estrada, who's the administrator for the Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards. Hi, Jackie.
Good morning, afternoon, or wherever you are in the world.
And we're here today to talk about the Eisner Awards and everything that they mean to us and to everybody else. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about Will Eisner?
Well, I would hope that most people in comics know the name Will Eisner and that he's one of the foundations of the whole comics medium as far as not only being a creator himself, but his contributions to just the whole industry in several aspects. Will, as a teenager, got into the comic book industry when it was in its early days in the late 1930s, and was actually a packager of comics for a lot of the superhero publishers, co-created Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, Black Hawk, and some other characters then. But he was also very business-minded, and he wanted to do something that he would own rather than doing stuff for other people. So he came up with this idea of doing a insert to Sunday newspapers that would have comics in it, and it was set up the size of a comic book. It was 16 pages, and he did a character called the Spirit that was the lead piece in each week's supplement. And the Spirit started off as something that he was experimenting with, just trying to tell a story. And as he got going on it, he started doing really interesting things as far as doing a splash page, which substituted for doing a cover, since this didn't have a cover on it. He experimented with doing things with lettering and coloring and page layouts and body language that nobody else had been doing. So that was the seminal comic that really put him on the map. After the early 50s, when comics went into disrepute, he went and used graphic storytelling for other kinds of things, like for advertising, commercial, and stuff like that. And people kind of forgot about the Spirit. But then Jules Pfeiffer did the great comic book heroes, and it had a Spirit strip in it. And that kind of revived attention to him, and then more Spirit comics came out. And one thing about Will, all the way back in 1943, he said, "Comics are new and raw in form just now, but material for limitless intelligent development. Eventually and inevitably, it will be a legitimate medium for the best of writers and artists." So he thought comics had so much potential back when comic strips, those were great, but comic books, those were, juvenile delinquent material. And then he was actually 60 years old when he did his first graphic novel. And it was 1978, and called A Contract with God. And the other thing that Will did, even though other books had come out for decades that told stories with graphic storytelling in a book form, is this actually had the term graphic novel on the title page on the cover. And he did many more graphic novels after that, but just other areas that he contributed to. He taught comics at the School of Visual Arts. He wrote books on graphic storytelling. He, of course, lent his name to the Eisner Awards, but also to the Comics Spirit of Retailing Award, and supported the retailing aspect. So they're just, I could talk about Will Eisner for like 5 hours. But that's a nutshell.
Yeah, and I definitely encourage everyone watching to look up more about Will Eisner. I mean, the contributions that he made are just kind of limitless. So how did that turn into the Eisner Awards?
Well, the history of the Eisner Awards is that there was something called the Jack Kirby Awards in the mid-'80s that Fantagraphics was behind. and a staff member at Fantagraphics, Dave Olbrich, was the administrator. And they actually conducted those and did the ceremony at Comic-Con. Dave left Fantagraphics because he had other things he was working on, and he wanted to take the Kirby Awards with him, and Fantagraphics wanted to keep him, so they pretty much agreed, okay, each of us will do our own awards. So Fantagraphics went on to do the Harvey Awards, and Dave went to Will Eisner and said, I'm going to set up a nonprofit organization to do an award ceremony, and we hope that you will lend your name to it. And Will agreed. So the first Eisner Awards were presented in 1988 at Comic-Con with Dave as the administrator. And then they had him again in 89. And then in 90, there were no Eisner Awards, and who knows what all the details were involved, but something happened with the nominating process that the ballots were messed up. And so Dave just said, look, I have so many other things on my plate that I really can't give my attention to this that I should. So he brought together a meeting at Comic-Con in 1990 with Dennis Kitchen and Will Eisner and some people from Comic-Con and me, and they were proposing that Comic-Con take over the Eisner Awards. And how I got involved, I guess, is because Will had dealt with me as having been editor of many of the publications at Comic-Con that he contributed to, and also I handled some guest relations type things. So he apparently thought I had the kind of knowledge and skills that would be appropriate for being the person in charge of this award. So that's how I got involved.
Awesome. What's one of your favorite Eisner memories?
Okay, I have so many Eisner memories, but let me start with one that's pretty common and people know about. And that's that at the actual ceremony, Will would be on the stage most of the time. As each award was given out, he would be the person to physically hand the award to the recipients. And so in 1998, Jeff Smith and Kurt Busiek were concerned, Will is kind of, in his 80s and he's not that spry or anything. Why don't you have some kind of chair or something for him to sit on the stage? And, I said, look, we've asked him if he wanted a chair or something. And he said, no, I'm fine. So they said, well, did you get something fancy like a throne or something for him to sit on? Well, it just so happened that Sue Lord, who's a longtime Comic-Con head of volunteers and done so many things for Comic-Con, also was involved with the San Diego Opera. And I thought, well, maybe they have props, and she borrowed a throne. So we got that delivered. We had it hidden behind some curtains. And when I called Will onto the stage for his part of the evening's events, Kurt and Jeff came running out with this throne and brought it up on the stage and set it down, and Will sat on it. We took pictures, and then he got up, and then he never sat in it the whole rest of the night. So that was characteristic of Will, that he would do something like that. Then Tom Lennon and Ben Grant, the creators of Reno 911, they have been presenters many times at the Eisners, and they always do something interesting and fun. So one year, when it was their turn to be presenters, they came on, they said, you guys, you're getting up here and you're accepting awards and you're being so sedate and, thank you. We want to see some excitement. We want to see some action here. Like, you're getting an Eisner Award, for goodness sake. So the first award they presented was for Best Painter, and the winner was Jill Thompson. Well, Jill went running from the audience, bounded onto the stage, jumped up and down, holding their hands. They were all three jumping up and down the stage. And she jumped up, I think it was on Ben, and he was spinning her around. And so that was a memorable moment. And then I really liked the time that, I think it was 2011, that Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon, two
Oh, I love them.
Twins from Brazil, they won the Best Limited Series for their book, Day Tripper. Well, when they get up on stage, we could not get them off the stage, but we didn't want to get them off the stage because they were so entertaining, and they would just, we love comics so much, and talking about just their love for the medium, and thanking Dark Horse, Diana Schutz, Bob Schreck, everybody who they had worked with. And then, after about 7 minutes, they said, and then we want to thank one last person, and that is the person who got us interested in comics and who always encouraged us, and that is our mother. And she is here in the audience tonight. Oh. So that was just so special.
That's so sweet. Can anyone submit for an Eisner?
The Eisner Awards call for submissions goes out to publishers in January of every year. If somebody doesn't think their publisher is going to send their work in, they can send it. Self-publishers can send their work, but it has to be material that has wide enough circulation so that potential voters would have had access to it. So it can't be, I printed 10 of these and then I'm going to send 5 of them to the Eisners.
What kind of trends in submissions have you seen over the recent years?
Well, it's been very interesting because the 2-step process for the Eisner Awards is, first there is a judging step in which over the years, there were 5 judges and 6 judges, but the judges would come to San Diego for 4 days in the spring, and all of the submissions would be in one room. And
I remember.
They would have an opportunity to, put hands on and look at everything. And one of the things that we do is we have things by category. So, a judge can go look at the international stuff or the archival material or whatever. And I remember the first few years, the room was filled with comics, and then there was like one table that had books on it. Well, as everything's evolved, pretty much there's one table with comics on it and the whole rest of the room is books. So that's one trend. But I would say that the most burgeoning area has been the kids and teens area, where we used to have, half a table with those things. Now it spills over, and there used to be one category. There's now 3 categories that's for early readers, kids, and teens. Also, there's been more what we call nonfiction graphic novels, where books that are either biographies, autobiographies, books about science, books about history. When you have things like March by John Lewis, and these are covering so many different aspects of reality. So we call it reality-based works. And that category had to spin off from graphic novel because there was just too many of them to try to do apples and oranges.
Yeah, those are some of my favorites. I think they're reality-based.
We've also had more international works that are published in the US and really high quality stuff. So that has been a category where it used to be one category, and now we have international, and then we have international Asia, which covers, manga and Korea and material coming out of Malaysia and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we had a tie for winners this year, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. And then also more academic and scholarly books. That is now a category where there used to be category comics related book. Now there's two of those. And one of them is for books that are about, theory related to comics, or they focus on some particular creator's work, or there's just been so many different topics that scholars and academics have covered. So that is a separate category. So every year it seems like there's more categories, but
this means more books, right?
yes. And then the really big thing is that more mainstream bookstore publishers now do graphic novels, especially in the kids categories. But I mean, where it used to be all comics publishers that were so many things, now, I mean, it's just routine for, Houghton Mifflin, Random House, Scholastic, all these, publishers that weren't distributed by the direct market are now just routinely, they have stuff, and it just adds to the whole variety. And of course, it didn't hurt that Raina Telgemeier has been a bestseller around the world with millions of things from Scholastic. Yeah. So that has been, those are kind of the main trends that I've noticed.
Yeah. And we're almost out of time. Gosh, I feel like I could talk about the Eisners for another hour, but what do you hope people think of when they think about the Eisner Awards?
I think it's an indication that this is something well worth your attention and reading, because it's going to be high quality, and that's the number one thing that the judges always go for is quality. So anything that's nominated is great.
And you can look on our website for a list of the Eisner nominees if you're looking for something to read during quarantine. There were some amazing winners this year and in past years. Is there any one that really stood out for you this year that you really, really loved?
Oh, I can't pick. It's like a parent with their children,
Well, thank you for talking to me today. And thank you, Thought Bubble Digital Comic-Con, for having us. Do you want to say any last words about the Eisners, Jackie?
I think Will was prophetic in wanting to let everyone know that this is a medium that's untapped. We think we've done everything. We haven't. It's just, there's no limit to creative ability in using graphic narrative.
Awesome. That's a great way to end it. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, my name is Ross Richie, and I am the founder and the chief executive officer or CEO of Boom Studios. And the Eisner Awards has asked me to speak about what the Eisner Awards means and what it means to a publisher. So as I think about addressing that topic, I think it's incredibly important to talk about Will Eisner as a creator himself. And I think foundationally, that's where you start. Now, one of the things that I think is lost when you just look at a simple bio of Will Eisner is the staggering number of achievements that he was able to put together and the influence that he's had on the business. So if you think about comic books that were being published in the 1930s in North America and the United States, as the market started to kind of coalesce and rev into what we see today, the market was finding its feet, and it was trying to figure out if it was merely a collection of previously published comic strips, or if there was opportunities for creators to come in and use the format, which was a longer magazine periodical format than the 4-panel comic strip, to tell unique stories. And in the 1930s, you start to see the business hit its stride. The creation of Superman in 1938, and the creation of Batman in 1939, and then the creation of Wonder Woman in 1940, and then you see things like Captain America in 1941, where you see these modern myths are generated in this baby medium that is just figuring out its business and how it's created. And Will is a part of that. there's a fair amount of stories about him writing and drawing his original creations and then working as a businessman who packaged together other creators and bridged the gap between creators to publishers, and was able to facilitate a large number of creators' careers by doing that. But that's sort of his beginning. And I think one of the significant contributions that he made was as a storyteller. Now, there are really four giants of this time period, and now I'm going to stretch from that sort of nascent 30s and through the 40s and into the 50s. And this is a time period that happens before Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko really launch what you think of Marvel Comics. And this golden age of comic book publishing, Jack Kirby is widely recognized as the greatest comic book artist, the Elvis of the medium, and rightfully so. Jack's dynamics, the way that he put figures into a panel, often counterintuitively, to create a dynamic sense of place and space, really revolutionized how comics were drawn and the sort of action storytelling that they could tell. But Jack, generally speaking, he was an inventor of the romance book, and he worked in crime books. But it was very much a genre focus for Jack, whether it was superheroes or westerns or action. Generally speaking, the material was genre in focus. Moving past Jack, you had Wally Wood, who was recognized in the 1950s as the greatest slick artist. What Wally did with a sense of detail and with a sense of rendering, with a fine line and a focus on being able to create dimension on the page was utterly mind-blowing. People did not think that you could do that with comic book art, and he achieved distinction with his style that put him head and shoulders above everyone else in the medium. And then it's important to mention Harvey Kurtzman. And Kurtzman in particular is known as the founder of MAD, and certainly he was extremely gifted when it came to doing comedic material. But beyond that, he was also known for his war stories, and he was able to, generally speaking, working as a writer, he was a writer-artist, but his ability to generate layouts that told the story in a really dynamic way. He was using time on the page through very thin panels and repetition and a number of other tools that are kind of standard in the toolbox. But Harvey really broke through and transformed the medium and the kinds of stories that you could tell, certainly the efficacy of them. It's really important to note that Harvey, his use of Mad Magazine is generally considered amongst comedic writers of any kind. Now we're talking about stand-ups, now we're talking about TV writers and film writers, that the Mad sensibility completely transformed American culture, and through extension, a lot of the comedic culture that we see globally subsequently. So as a writer and a cartoonist, his contributions can't say enough about what a luminary he was. But beyond that, the war stories that he did were full of pathos and pain, and were much more than a bang-bang shoot-'em-up, which was pretty standard for the era. So amongst those contemporaries, Will Eisner is the other significant fourth creator for this time period. And what Will did was Will brought in a sense of design, and he imported a lot of tricks, dynamic tricks from film, and in particular noir. Now, there's a lot of superheroes in our business, and people tend to focus on the superheroes. But Will's known for creating the spirit, but Will really created a noir story with the spirit that just happened to be a superhero. And he often talked about the fact that they wanted a superhero, so I took my detective and I put a domino mask on him, and through that he became a superhero. And Will certainly was not interested in doing superhero stories. And so he avoided that for most of his career. And I think that's really important, because in so doing, he helped widen the focus of a lot of comic book publishing. and the interests of a lot of comic book creators, because the creators are inspired by the greatest creators. And seeing someone that was interested in more than just superheroes was really important. And so beyond that, Will told his stories in 7 or 8 page chunks through the Spirit Publishing. He did it with a Spirit section that was put in newspapers, which was a very rare opportunity. Basically, you'd get your newspaper, you'd open it up. Instead of the conventional comic strip section, there would be like a 16-page section you could pull out that Will was in charge of, designed. He did his own story in the front and then did side characters in the back with other creators. And that was a novel form of distribution, and certainly converted a tremendous number of people who'd never read a comic book into comic book readers, which is one of the greatest goals that we could ever have as a medium. And he was really focused on stretching the medium. And there were storytelling tricks. To call them tricks is not to denigrate them, but to rather look at them in admiration of being able to coin a new vocabulary. And he really pushed the medium and showed people that it was capable of doing things that they never thought before. If you are ever interested, you should look at, and don't know about this, you should look at the Spirit splash pages, where he takes the lettering for the Spirit's name and breaks it up into cityscapes or puts it across really dynamic visual layouts. It is utterly innovative, and no one's gotten anywhere close in the 70 years subsequent to this art. So beyond that, he went into the military when he came out in the early 70s. Now you need to think about, Will is 50 now. During this time period, the underground comics have exploded with Robert Crumb and people like that. And through that process, creator ownership becomes extremely important for the artists to own the material that they generate. Now, Will had gotten the copyright to the Spirit. And so despite the fact that he wasn't a hippie, he found a real kindred spirit with this counterculture movement. And I think it's remarkable that he embraced these creators. Many of his contemporaries, Will's contemporaries, were more conservative and were alienated from those creators, but Will really supported them and actively engaged with them. And during this time period, he also sought out publishers that republished the Spirit. And that's really important, because the modern graphic novel collection that recollects previously existing material to sell it to fans that have never read it before, that sort of the way was paved by someone like Will, who was recollecting previously published material and putting it out in a new format. Now, the conventional graphic novel collection that we know nowadays had not been invented yet. So Will did it through periodical magazine format, but it still is remarkable. That then, of course, gets us to the graphic novel. And Will did not invent the graphic novel, but Will saw it as an important story medium. And he took a lot of the memoir storytelling techniques that were being used by the underground creators and synthesized them into heartfelt, poignant, powerful, thinly fictionalized stories about his own life. One of the most powerful of which was the death of his teenage daughter from leukemia. And through doing that, paved the way for things like Mouse to be published, which, Mouse had been a big deal and was contemporaneous with all of that stuff. But Will really broke through as a champion of the graphic novel and was able to get it on everyone's map much better. Now, I've been an Eisner Spirit of Retailing judge twice. It's an honor, one of the best honors of my life. And Will had a focus in the Eisner Awards to support retailers and to highlight the best retailers so that the other retailers could get inspired and the whole medium would move forward with comic shops. And during this time period in the 1980s, his output slows down somewhat. He's still creating great work, but his focus really is on pushing the medium further. And I will tell you that in many ways is some of the most engaging aspects of Will's career for me, because at Boom, we are driven to find new readers. You see that through our efforts with Lumberjanes. We do a lot of licenses, which are often people's first comic book that they ever get an opportunity to read. And we do a lot of original graphic novels with people like Roxane Gay or Saba Tahir that give people that would not be traditionally considered comic book readers an opportunity to read comics. And I think that is one of the greatest things that we could all do as comic book professionals, is lead people into being able to experience comics for the first time. And Will really was a voice for shaping those things in a way that a lot of the creators that I mentioned, whether Wally Wood, who tragically, was no longer around at that time period, or folks like Jack Kirby, Jack really tried to push the medium, but he wasn't as active in formats and in speaking with retailers and pushing the medium and the world to go further in comics just as a community, to make it more welcoming, make it more of a place that could do different kinds of material. So as a publisher, I find Will Eisner inspiring, and the awards represent his spirit so well, because there's so many different awards that recognize our rich talent that we have that's unique in comic book publishing, and it is the highest honor. This is our Academy Awards, this is our Oscars, the Eisner Awards, and it is an honor and a privilege to be asked to say what it means. And my response to what does the Eisner Awards mean, I think it means everything. And I think it's super important for us as we go forward as a creative medium, as we try to spread our love of what we do to the world. I think that the Eisner Awards is an excellent tool to do that. And beyond that, I think that Will, as a creator, is inspiring. He's inspiring to every single publisher, all the retailers, all the fans. He's inspiring, of course, to the creators. And I think the awards are so important because it gives us an opportunity to really spotlight our creators and to give them recognition that they've earned and that they deserve for doing superlative work, and giving them an opportunity to really become seen for who they are. So in the end, what do the Eisner Awards mean? I think it is a privilege and an honor. It is a spectacular event, and it's something that we are privileged to have won some awards at Boom and to be a part of. And I just want to thank the Eisner Awards for asking for our commentary. And so thank you so much.